Kyle, thank you for joining us today. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Kyle, I was thinking back, I think we've known each other now for 20 plus years.
Yeah,
And when people ask me about your background and experience, what I'm typically telling them is if there's a go-to UX research expert and consultant who you have questions for or would like to work with, Kyle is the go-to I go to. I'm really excited you're here today. Another reason I was so excited to have you here is I know this is the 20th anniversary of your consultancy. And I've been talking in my rounds, talking with folks, especially researchers who are thinking about going on their own or have just gone on their own. I thought, who could provide them the most expertise? So I immediately thought of you. So you've been running your consultancy, Usable Interface, for 20 years. As I mentioned, you're a UX research expert I turn to. You're also the past president of the UXPA New Hampshire. And I believe this is still the case. You're the career center lead of the IA conference. Is that
right.
correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm thrilled you're here. And as I mentioned, this will be asking you anything. I'll start with a few questions. I know there's a bunch of folks on the line who are thinking about making the leap to consulting or have just done that. So we'll spend a lot of time there. But to start, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Specifically, when did you first get started in the UX field and what led to your leap to consulting?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for inviting me and all your kind words. I really appreciate it. I think I've always been passionate about UX research, and it is scary making the leap to consulting, and I'm always happy to help anyone who wants to do that. So I'm happy to have this Q&A, and hopefully I can get to your questions. But if not, contact me afterwards. I would be happy to share what I know about it. But to answer your question, so how did I get into UX? How did I end up here as a consultant? Really, I went to school to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. That was my thing. I really had a love for human behavior and just really trying to understand why the hell people do what they do, because it was always fascinating to me. But somewhere along the way, I discovered computers and discovered that I was really good with them. And with a little push from a professor, I went to computer science instead and became a developer. So that's how I started my career after school, was development. But it got dull really fast. Everything we were creating, developing and it was frustrating because I couldn't make it better. I did not have that skill set, but I knew it needed to be made better. So it was a little frustrating. And what happened was I made that switch. I think it's important to mention, from psychology to computers, not just because, oh, I found this thing, I stumbled on it and I was good at it, but also as I always knew that I wanted a family. And I planned my career, even at a very young age, around that. And maybe perhaps I did the wrong thing in giving up on my dream of psychology, and because I knew that I needed flexibility with my work if I wanted to one day raise a family. And I kept that in my mindset. I'm like, programmers, developers, computer work possibly could be done from home. At that time, it was foreign. I'm like, but I just felt like there was more flexibility without having to do all the extra school of becoming a psychologist. And that kind of led me to the consulting route too, flexibility with my schedule, which means everything. So I realized, like I said, that everything we were developing was crap. And I learned about this world of usability. I just stumbled upon it. I was sent to, I think the conference was called Internet World or something like that at the time. Somebody gave a talk on card sorting and usability testing. And I was like, what is this? This is amazing. And it was like the two worlds collided: psychology, development, computers. And it was like the perfect marriage of my two loves and what I was good at. And that was it. Once the dot-com bubble burst, I lost my job anyway, and everybody had to go find real jobs at that time. I was like, I'm going to do this. And from that point on, that's what I did. They called it a web architect, was the first job. It was focusing on the front end. My job was to really do front end coding, but I made it the job I wanted. I introduced them to usability testing. I read everything and anything you could on usability because the word UX wasn't even used at the time. And I loved it, but I hated the corporate environment, really hated it. I worked for a Fortune 500 at the time. It was extremely toxic. I joked with Christine before that what I found in that environment was that you're really only as good as your last joke at the last meeting. And I don't tell good jokes. I'm not really built for politics and corporate culture. And they would have consultants come in from the outside and they would be like speaking the word of God. And we, all of us internal folks who have been saying the same thing, like we need to do this, we need to have this kind of process. It's like you lose all credibility the moment you're hired. So I looked at that and I'm like, that's what I want to do. What is that about? How do you become a consultant? I want to actually walk into a company and have credibility and have trust. And it was just, to me, it was baffling that the moment you're hired, you lose all trust. I got fed up enough at the company to leave without anywhere to go, no other job lined up. And I said, you know what? I'm going to contract. I'm going to do contracting. And that way I'm not married to the company. It's only a short gig and maybe I can stomach it for a while. But contracting, I found very quickly that if you do a good job, the contract just never ends.
Mhm.
And you're essentially an internal employee anyway. You still have to be there 9 to 5. You're still in a cube. And I'm like, this is not what I wanted. The moment I got an invitation to a baby shower, I'm like, oh, I've been here too long.
That
Yeah.
sounds like your goal for flexibility wasn't happening in the contract type role.
Yeah, not at
Yeah.
all. And then I finally met some people who were real consultants, not contractors. And I'm like, what is it? What is this? How do you do this? And how do you have your own home office where you do the work and you're only on site as needed? And I learned that it's pretty obvious, but I didn't realize it at the time. You just simply state your working conditions, your working environment, how you work. If somebody wants to engage with you, you say, that's great. I will be on site for these meetings. I will not be on site for these doing this work. And you just lay it out there. And I was shocked that I could do that, that I had the power to do that. But
Yeah.
once I did, it came very quickly. And I notified the world I'm out here as a consultant, multiple gigs at a time and taking multiple clients. And it just went from there. But it took a while for me to change that mindset, that contracting mindset.
Can I ask you, you can't really see when I'm looking down, I'm feverishly taking notes, Kyle. And I had a couple of questions. When you were starting out your consultancy, and as you mentioned, first it started in contracting, but you evolved to more of a strategic consultant role. You mentioned this desire to have flexibility for thinking ahead with your family. When I'm talking and seeing online these days in the current conditions, a lot of consultants are feeling this push for hustle culture, business development, putting themselves out there all the time, writing on LinkedIn, blogging, that whole notion of hustling. I wonder, since you've been out on your own for 20 years, have you gotten to the level of flexibility you need for your family? Or is there still a lot of high tense business development, hustling? What is your typical day like? And do you have the flexibility you desired?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So 5 years into my consulting, that's when I started having kids. I have two right now. One's 14 and one's 11. They are both home right now downstairs. They're quiet because they know I'm on a call. And they're used to that. That's from day one with them. They know that mommy works at home and that sometimes I have to, they can't make noise. And honestly, I couldn't be happier with the flexibility. But I want to caveat that with yes, I am hustling all the time. It doesn't stop. There is no defined work hours, but there are a lot of working hours. It might not be 40 hours a week some weeks. It might be a lot, maybe 50 other weeks or more. It just depends what's going on. Sometimes I'm juggling an awful lot. Like you have to do the work to get the work, whether it's writing an article, giving a talk at a conference, trying to put together a newsletter, who knows what it is. But that on top of your client work, on top of fielding inquiries, writing proposals, it can be a lot to juggle at times. And sometimes it's slow and you're never more stressed out than when it's slow. And you should be doing a lot of outreach. So what it comes down to is you're never truly slow. You might have slow client work, but you're always doing the work to line up more work. So you're really always working in a
Yeah.
sense. But I personally like that. You have to have that mindset that it's not going to just fall from the sky. It's not going to come easily. You have to really work for your leads. Good work leads to more work. So you don't want to be slacking when you do finally get that work. You want to really hit a home run every time so that they come back to you and that they spread the word about you. Because
Mhm.
really, word of mouth is honestly the most marketing that I do. It's not like we can put a billboard on the side of the road for the work we do. It's
Mhm.
very niche. So it's your network is everything and fostering that network. I
Yep.
would say now, do I wish I had more flexibility? I think we all do. But I have been able to, while my kids have been in school all this time, I get them off the bus, I put them on the bus. If I need to, I take off to like participate in some field day event or some kind of trip, field trip, chaperoning certain things that I don't have to ask a boss to say, hey, I want to take this time off. I just don't
Yeah.
schedule myself as available that time.
Yeah.
And that might mean I'm working late that night. But to me, that flexibility is everything. And I've talked candidly to other consultants before that there may be some years when I actually don't make as much as I would if I was internal. That's the God's honest truth. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But to me, that flexibility personally is worth so much more,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially now.
Absolutely. Lisa had a question, and I have a
Oh,
follow-up to
yeah.
Lisa's question. She was asking, do you focus on specific industries? And my follow-up to that, once you answer that, is in my consultancy, I've seen the UX research practice evolve and mature over time. So I'm curious if the types of UX research projects that you're asked to do has evolved over time. And the question is, what types of research practices are you being asked for? And how has it evolved over time? But starting with Lisa's question, what industries are you typically working with?
Yeah, so I don't specialize in a certain industry. Some people will have told me, have given me consulting advice that is the wrong thing to do. That if you want to not be chasing leads constantly and just letting like floating down the river and just seeing where it takes you, if you want to actually direct where it goes, then you need to specialize. I understand that thinking and it makes a whole lot of sense. But even after 20 years of doing this, it's scary to specialize. For me to say, that is it. I am now the e-commerce UX research person that you come to, or I am now the medical device person you come to. There's two reasons why I haven't. It's scary to turn down work that, and you don't necessarily have to. I've talked to other people who say, I might still take on some other industries, but I only advertise as this. So you could do that. And I still think about it from time to time. But the other reason why is I really enjoy the variety. I love that I've worked on medical devices. I've worked on kitchen appliances like dishwashers and ovens and washing machines. Most of my work is web apps and web applications, but banking, travel industry, it's just been all over the place and it's been wonderful. And it just keeps it so interesting to me. But I can see how marketing is a lot easier when you just specialize in one or two different things. So it's something I think about. I think it's hard to do. I think it's brave to do it. I know some who do, but yeah, it's just not something I've done. And I don't think I've suffered too much from it. Perhaps I would have an easier time finding work though if I did.
You were mentioning, and we hear this all the time, especially in the current landscape for researchers and UX consultants, that your network, you mentioned your network
Yeah.
is everything. And some consultants in the past, when the environment and client hasn't been as difficult, they may not have spent as much time actively working on business development. Kyle, you mentioned that you're working for your leads, and I know a lot of your work comes from word
Yeah.
of mouth, but what does that mean to you when you're actively working for your leads? What does that
Yeah.
mean? What are you doing? You talked about some articles, and I'm curious what your strategy is for business development.
Yeah, so it's really just staying in touch with my network. So not letting, it'll be years that have gone by before I've worked with a client again, but it's not years since we talked, right? I want to constantly, not constantly, maybe once every 2 quarters, check in. If I see an interesting article, just share it with them, say, this reminded me of the work we did. And just trying to keep them aware that you're still out there, that you still exist, and that you are still there for them when the time comes. To me, that kind of business development is what keeps you in business more so than marketing. I think the marketing part is important in terms of posting on LinkedIn, perhaps writing articles and speaking. That does that is needed, but it is a really long time before you see the effects of that. I may give a great talk and there might be buzz about it, but it could be years before I actually get a lead where somebody goes, you know what, somebody I know saw you talk and they said that I really have to reach out to you for this type of work. I'm like, oh, great. But that was 2 years ago. So it's all good, but it takes time. But when you're making contact with someone in your network, that can sometimes be immediate. Sometimes I'll arrange a call, we'll catch up, and it's not supposed to be about work. It's just to catch up. And they go, you know what? Something did come up, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, and something all of a sudden develops. So I say working for those leads, you're really staying active with your network. There is something else, like when it comes to marketing, to be honest, if you talk to any consultant in the UX industry, this past year has been hard. I don't know anybody that it hasn't been hard on. And now more than ever, we have to do a little bit more than I think we had to do in the past, or at least me personally, just speaking for myself. It's been slow. Things have finally started picking up, but the 2023 was just a rough year. And because of that, I see value in doing a little bit more marketing. And I'm actually, I feel I've never felt good about, I feel like there's a little sliminess to sales that I've never felt very comfortable with. So I want to do it in a way that gives something back. And when Christine asked me about doing this, it was so funny because I'm like, this is so perfect because this is exactly the kind of marketing slash giving back that I want to do. So I'll share a link here in the chat. So I always tell everyone to write as much as you can, present as much as you can, do a newsletter if that's your thing. For me, a newsletter doesn't work. It's a lot of work to do a really good newsletter. But for me, this is what I want to do. So this is a podcast that I'm starting about for UX consultants. So it's called the UX Consultants Lounge. It's going to be launched in about 3 or 4 weeks. But I just want to have these types of conversations with other people, other UX consultants, but also people we can learn from well, whether it be a lawyer that can help us with contracts or public speaking specialist or who knows. But the people that I want to have, the guests I want to have will really serve this niche very well. And it also reminds people that I'm out there. And I'm very excited, like it excites me to do this. I'm excited to learn from it and to help other people learn from it and also just help promote my business. That just a reminder, folks, I'm actually still a consultant and still out there. So those are the types of things we have to do. And it is work. It's a lot of work to do, but it's fun. As long as you find fun in it, it won't feel like as much work.
Kyle, I'm very
Yeah.
excited for your
Oh, good.
podcast. Jessica also said the same. Many of us are, Rebecca
Oh,
as
good.
well. So thank you for sharing that. I've
Yeah.
been waiting for your episode. I did have a question about networking because you said
Yeah.
something that really resonated with me, that a lot of consultants and also people internally looking for new jobs, this notion of networking and sales oftentimes makes people cringe. The way you described the approach to reaching out to your network is not the salesy, make me cringe approach. What you talked about is that you're reaching out, you're sending an article that may be valuable. You're not saying, hey, do you have a project for me? You're thinking about your clients and how you might provide value. Is that accurate? It's more about building a relationship versus sales.
Absolutely. Because otherwise, I personally just do not feel comfortable with it. And I actually had hired a sales coach way back. It was, and he ended up firing me as a client, which I don't, it was the right thing to do. It was a mismatch of personalities. You can't just, what works for one person might not work for another when it comes to sales tactics. And this person just wanted me to do things that I was not comfortable with. And when I executed them so poorly, because I'm not comfortable with it. I can't write these, they call them the half email when you're trying to be aggressive with sales. And it's not me. So I needed to find someone else that really worked with me and how I like to work. There are sales coaches, but find one that works for you. But yeah, I think giving back is the best way to let people know that you're still there for them rather than just being like, I'm slow this month. Do you have
Yeah.
anything for me?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very different conversation. Jessica had an excellent question where we've been seeing how do we say it? It's been a rough climate out there, especially for UX professionals, even more so for UX researchers. And we've seen even full-time employees getting laid off. And I'm wondering, Jessica had asked, in your role as a consultant, how are you navigating this where the current hiring climate, there's so many researchers out there right now, and the desire and climate for research has slowed. So how have you been handling this period?
Yeah, it's tough. What I'm seeing is a lot of the rates going way, way
Mhm.
down, which is so insulting. It really is. So these rates that I'm seeing, they're lower than introductory rates when I started 20 years ago. And I'm like, this is insane. If you can find somebody that wants to do, whether it's a usability testing study or a persona project for $50 an hour, it's good luck with that. You get what you pay for, in my mind. And to me, it is an art, not a science. It depends who you hire. You can hire two different researchers to try and execute a somewhat similar objective. You will have totally different results, different methodologies. It matters who you hire. I stick very firmly to my pricing. I've been told that sometimes it's on the high end or it might not work for some people. I don't compromise on price. Erica Hall says, and it's totally like, you will always find somebody cheaper if you want
Mhm.
to. I compete on value. I believe in value-based pricing, but I am seeing a change. And as hard as it is now, and even seeing that the market is flooded with researchers and people who want to now freelance or consult, that there's this air of desperation and people willing to do anything for a certain amount. I think it'll take a little bit of time to feel the pain of that and what that, but I do feel I'm optimistic that the pendulum will swing and it will swing hard the other way, but it's just going to take some time. So it's riding out these rough periods. And it's not easy to do. You really do rely on your network. You rely on your savings sometimes. You really just keep at it, but do not compromise, I believe, on your price. I think that hurts us all when we all start lowballing and just saying, you know what, I'll just take it. Why are they going to pay you more later? And it
Yep.
is more valuable than what it's being priced at sometimes.
Yeah. You mentioned value-based pricing. So, and you've also talked about the difference between contracting and consulting. So, value-based pricing, first, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I do not price hourly if I have a direct client work. So I will sometimes subcontract, and but that is with, it has to be an established design firm. So let's say I used to do a lot with MadPal before they dissolved, like for 11 years on and off. If their UX research team was overloaded and busy and they had extra overflow, they would contact me and some other trusted consultants, and we would partner together. They knew how I worked. They trusted me. They didn't have to watch over me. And it was just like, let us know when the project's done. And it was a great, beautiful arrangement. Now, does that help my business? Not really, because it's their client. It's not my client. I can't put that on my client list. It doesn't necessarily grow my business, but of course, it's experience that's valuable. And sometimes they're getting clients, these bigger agencies that I can't get. There was one situation though once where I subcontracted and later was subcontracting through another firm for the same client. And they realized like, oh, I can get Kyle whether I go to this firm or this firm. And I'm like, you should have, and I want to be like, you should have came to me directly for a third of the price. But you can't poach, of course, clients. That's huge. That's not allowed. But so I will subcontract, and usually that's hourly. With some situations, I can still do a flat fee, and that's what I prefer. But the value-based pricing is simply because I don't bill hourly because I'm not selling my time. That's not what I'm selling. I'm selling my value. Billing hourly doesn't work because if I do something faster and more efficient, it doesn't mean I should be penalized for it and make less, right? That comes because of years and years of efficiency that I've developed. That comes at a price. So it becomes like I honed my craft, like became more efficient, and therefore I'm more valuable. And that experience is just worth more. So rather than inputs, value-based pricing is really focused on outcomes and the benefits that's delivered. And clients, I find, really like the flat project fees because there are no surprises. They do not have to worry about being billed more later. It does require scoping it really well. And sometimes if this is a huge project, I will actually, the scoping part is paid for. They will pay to have the scope properly and really a strategy created and then pay to have it executed. But you cannot do value-based pricing and a fixed project fee if there are unknowns. If it's research, how many people are you including in your study? How long are the sessions? What exactly are the deliverables? What's the timeline? If you don't have answers to all these questions, you can't do a flat fee because
Mhm.
there will be surprises that will either hurt you or them. So find out all the ancillary costs, everything that you need to build into that. And in the end, it's great because you say, this is the total price. Either I require 50% upfront to hold those dates and to start work on this project as a deposit. And then the other 50% do net 15 upon completion. They will balk at that. And I usually say, okay, net 30, but that's it. I do not go beyond net 30. Never. I've had people say, net 90 is what we do. I'm like, then I'm sorry, we can't work together. I can't float my business for 3 months not getting paid. That just doesn't work. And
This
you,
is,
oh,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Sorry, Kyle. I just was
Yeah.
going to say this is another example of making the transition to a strategic consultant. You set the terms and you have your boundaries as a consultant. So that just does not play for you, net 90.
It does not work. Yeah. And I've had people push back and then they have to go back to their legal department or whatever process they have for hiring. And then they typically say, okay, we'll do net 30, like they're doing you a big favor. But they hear this all the time too. They're just trying to get away with it. And I have had people who reach that net 30 point and they're late and I have to write those emails. And that's frustrating. That's stressful, but usually it doesn't happen. Usually it's pretty good. But also I have found that pricing strategy typically works for me. But I have noticed, I don't know if it's since the pandemic or what, but the last few years, people have been really hard about paying. Everybody's running lean. So I prefer now to do a third up front, a third like after phase one, whatever that is, and then a third is the final. Because I've also noticed that I want to define done for that final payment really well, where done is not the presentation, the final readout of the research study. Done is when I hand them the research report because I found that, oh, we can't, it's going to be 2 weeks before we can actually have that presentation and have all the stakeholders there. So I don't want to delay payment 2 weeks. So once I submit my final report, I can invoice and we can do the presentation whenever. And I don't have to worry about that.
Kyle, also, it's really fascinating. I do the same in terms of structuring the billing. I've also found, and I'm curious your take, when you were talking about value-based pricing, a key component of that is you've been very clear on what you'll be delivering, like the
Yeah.
deliverables, but also the outcomes and value. And by doing that, it makes it much easier as a consultant to figure out what the tiers should be, like what the timing is for invoicing. Has that
Yeah.
been your experience as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It writes itself. If the
Mm-hmm.
scope is well defined, it's real easy to see where those points are.
Yep, yep. We got lots of
Yeah.
great questions, lots of positive, excellent feedback in terms of what you're sharing, Kyle. A couple of details about your consulting practice that we got questions about. First, you're based in the Northeast. I'm wondering, the question was related to, are the majority of your clients in the same area? Or are they across the country or international? Where are they based?
They're all over. I've only had one international client, actually two. Canada, I forget. That's international. And I found that's hard. International is just a little tough, especially with research with what we do. I've worked through translators before and it just doesn't work. I really recommend that they go with a local moderator. And if they need me to help manage that effort, that's fine. But yeah, usually North America and it's all over. It's funny because I was originally from Philadelphia and I had most of my work in the Philly area. And then when I moved to New England in 2007 in New Hampshire, I was really worried. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm starting, and there's a big UX community here and I'm coming into it. It took a while. It was like 4 years before I had a New England client, but it didn't matter because I was working with people in California and Florida. It was just all over. And I didn't really realize that sometimes where I'm based locally, it doesn't even matter. Especially now more than ever. 20 years ago, it was a little bit less remote, but now everyone's remote.
Right. Yep,
Yeah.
yep. A detail about your subcontracting, Dan was asking if you sign a non-compete with the agency, and if
Uh,
so, when and why?
Yeah, it depends. There have been some that I've signed that they're really granular. They specialize in a certain client that really I can understand they want to protect. Others, it's like, I have said I cannot sign this and still be in business. And they understand that after I point it out to them. But it's a great question because you should definitely push back on that. If there are times where I'm competing with a big agency, and that's just what comes down to. And sometimes they went out, sometimes I went out, and I can understand why people want to go sometimes with a big agency, and I'm not a fit. But we can't cut each other off like that. It just doesn't work. And it just requires you to speak up and say that, and then they usually go, okay. Yeah, a good question.
I had wondered, you talked about the question I have is about trust and relationship building with your clients. You mentioned so much of the work comes from word of mouth and also repeat clients over time. And I'm wondering, working with clients in-house, when you're coming in for a first-time engagement, I know you get a lot of repeat work. I'm wondering, when you're running research studies, how do you establish that relationship, the strong relationships, the trust, the credibility? Are there things that you're consciously thinking about to establish those in-house relationships, even though you're external?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I do think trust is the cornerstone of consulting. And it can sometimes take years to win trust, and it can take moments to lose it. It's really precious, and it's the biggest gift that any client can give you is them trusting you. And to me, there's no greater feeling in the world than being like, they're asking me a question and they actually trust my answer. That's a huge compliment, and I don't take that lightly. And the truth of the matter is, people don't tell you when they stop trusting you. You just don't hear from them anymore. So it's precious. Always keep your promises. That's a major thing. That under promise, over deliver all the time. I want to make sure that I'm always delivering on what I say I'm going to deliver on, and that the quality is always very high. I think that when you promise a bill of goods that you're not delivering on, that trust is just lost completely. Things happen. We all have family emergencies, things come up. Just be transparent, have constant communication, and usually things work out okay. But I have found that I have a hard time saying no. And sometimes that can be a bad thing, sometimes that can be good. I find that I had a client once tell me that, oh, you're just so good at just being so flexible. We always throw you these curveballs and it doesn't frazzle you, you just roll with it. But I know when you tell me no, that it really is a no because you always say yes. So sometimes when, you're always trying to be helpful and take on certain things, that can actually make your nose stronger for whatever it's worth. But I find that you should never ever be dishonest, and you should not be dishonest even if the client requests it. I've had clients that have said things to me like, the objective of the study is really this, but we don't want the participants to know that. And I'm like, that's an ethical dilemma there. I cannot lie about the objective of the study. For instance, if we build this product, then it's going to take away the product that they really love, and lie to them and tell them that they're going to keep their product. I can't.
Mhm.
They will respect you more in the end for that. You really have to stand your ground when it comes to ethics. But when it comes to earning that trust, I think, as we all probably know, good research is just never done in a vacuum. You have to involve them throughout the entire process. The more you involve them, the more that they can see transparency behind your process, they can understand your thinking, the more that they'll trust you. I always encourage them to take part in the research through observation, through note taking. I will run note taking workshops to make sure that they understand the best ways to do it. I'll give assignments to say, okay, you're going to focus on this part during the observation, you'll focus on this part, and we'll report back. I always run debriefs, even if people didn't observe, but they should have. I'll run a debrief and letting them know what they missed so that they're not hearing findings for the first time when you're delivering the readout. There really should be no surprises. They should be involved completely throughout. And then once we have the data, what do we do with it? A lot of times people will just say, here you go, and walk away. I think as consultants, what we need to do, which helps again with the trust, is to workshop that data together, to work with it. Let's create an action plan with it. Let's create personas with it, journey maps as a team. Just working together really helps a lot with the trust.
It sounds like also if you're workshopping with the team, once you move on from the engagement, they feel a sense of ownership around the work.
Yeah, they do. And also they remember you. So when they jump ship to another job, they're like,
Mhm.
oh, we worked with this great consultant. Let me see if I can find her and bring you in again.
Okay. This may
Yeah.
involve some tough love for some folks. We'll see. I'm leading the witness. Poor decision as a researcher. But I was curious, there's a bunch of people in the product and UX space who have been in-house for years and for many different reasons. Some by choice, others not so much. They're considering thinking about making the leap to consulting. And I wonder for first-time consultants who are making the leap right now in this climate, do you have advice for them? You've shared a lot of wonderful tips, but what would
Yeah.
you recommend to someone who's making the leap now for the first time?
I I won't sugarcoat it. It's hard now. But if you really feel like this is it, otherwise you're in a soul-sucking situation. I can't possibly work in a corporate world. That would just suck the life out of me. And I feel you. I get it. I say, if you're feeling that, do it. Do it. Who cares how hard it is? There will always be hard times. You have to be, like we mentioned before, willing to hustle. And that just means some people think of hustle as a bad term. It just means that you're a go-getter, that you're motivated to actually do this and that you find it fun. I don't like sales at all. So just switching that mindset and framing it differently and just thinking about helping people, offering your services, right? So you must be self-motivated, willing to hustle. You must have a good network. I talk to a lot of folks that are like, I really want to do what you do, but I don't know anyone. I'm like, don't go out yet. Don't.
Yeah.
You're not ready. And don't jump off that cliff. You have to have that network. People who support the work you do, they are fans of the work you do, that are just like, yeah, go get them. And they might not be the ones that are hiring you, but they're helping spread that good word about you. That is important. That is really the livelihood for me personally, and with my consulting is my network. I do think you have to have a good bit of savings. It is stressful. I have not been lucky enough in my 20 years to say I've never had bench time. I've had a lot of bench time. I've had that.
Yeah.
There are some quarters that are just great, some that are not. It happens. It is a roller coaster ride, and there are ups and downs, and you just have to be able to swing it. You get really good at, sometimes you get this lump sum, boom, like here's half the project fee, and you're like, whoa, but you cannot spend that, like besides
Well, you could.
you could, right? But you're going to be back on LinkedIn being like, I'm slow.
Help. Yes.
Yeah. Take your 30% away or whatever for taxes. You take the other part and it just doesn't exist. You have to, some people pay themselves. They're set up as a corporation. I never set up, I'm an LLC, not an S Corp or C Corp or anything else. I don't like the idea of bookkeeping. I've always hated it. So I don't pay myself. I just am very good about not touching my profit if I can. So you have to have good savings. And I would say, I don't think this goes for a lot of people because I know a lot of you are veterans in this industry. If you are not, if you are new to the industry, I do want to say that I you have to be a master at your craft before you go out on your own. I do think that there's value in doing pro bono work to learn, you're building out your portfolio. But if you're really ready to hang a shingle out there, right? And say, I'm out here, my services are out here, I'm going to have a business. You have to have at least a bare minimum of 5 years experience. You should not necessarily be learning the basics on the job. Now, there are new things all the time to learn. I'm learning on the job, new things, AI, there's so much going on. But I should be able to scope a project. I should be able to know certain differences with different methods. And I shouldn't be asking basic questions as a consultant. So
Mhm.
I really think that you have to have that firm confidence. And confidence is key. Mike Montero has this great wisdom about confidence. And when he hires someone and they get that imposter syndrome, which we all have it, he says that's fine, but don't show it to the client. You know what I mean? And that sounds horrible, but you really do have to present yourself. You have to be client facing. You have to be able to command that room and say, you can trust me. I do think this is the best strategy, and let them have faith in you. They're not going to have faith in you if you are showing that you're really unsure of yourself. That's not good. You can be unsure of yourself, but you can't let them know that. Hopefully you're not, though. Hopefully you're not, but we all get it from time to time. But I think Mike puts it in a much more eloquent way where he says, the client has really, you won the bid. They really evaluated you against other people and they chose you. Don't do them the disservice of having imposter syndrome now. Give them the confidence that they thought they were getting when they hired you.
Mhm. Thanks, Kyle. A couple of questions. Jessica was asking in terms of workload. You mentioned there's really great times and slow times. Is your workload seasonal? Have you seen patterns, or is it very unpredictable, whether you're off in the summer or holidays? How does that work for you?
Super unpredictable. And
Yeah.
that's probably because I work across a range of industries, like I said before. I've had times where it's like the holidays are like crickets, and then other times where it's get it done by 1/1 madness. And I wanted to mention too, I put a note down when we were talking about specializing. In a way, I thought that I had specialized because I didn't necessarily choose an industry, but I positioned myself and let everyone know that I am a qualitative researcher. If you have this huge quantitative study, I'm not your girl, and I will give you other consultants to go to that I trust that will do a killer job. I will do a mixed methods approach, but usually it's very light surveys, 500-person surveys, not thousands. I don't want to get into stats and all that. So to me, that's specializing, but it's probably not enough, not to where people would say I'm doing enough specializing, but
Yep.
that's what I choose.
A couple of questions around your UX research specific consulting work. I'm wondering, Dan, in terms of following up where you were saying how important it is to immerse yourself with the teams and get them on board. How do you handle when the client hires you because they want you to do the work and take it off your hands? Is there some level of balance you need to find there in terms of if the client says, hey, Kyle, we just want you to run with this research, we are not going to be involved. What do you say and why?
It's so hard. And that happens because they're super busy and they can't be involved as much. Sometimes they will promise you like we're going to be involved and then all of a sudden they're not. And I just keep trying to remind them that you get what you put into it. You will get so much more out of it if you're observing firsthand, if you're just part of the process. And if they're not, I can't really do much about it. I really can't. I've done everything I can to invite them, to let them know how important it is, but it does happen, unfortunately, where they just fall off and because they're super busy and stretched super thin. But I just try to, as much as I can, involve them. But yeah, it does happen.
Yeah. And Jackie was asking, and I've been hearing this a lot as well. She said there's been some talk in the industry about moving strategic research outside of projects and products and be more cross-functional across the organization. Is this something you're hearing from your clients, and are these some of the projects you're working on?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a good thing that we're starting to see more of that cross-discipline approach. I haven't seen any downsides to that, except when it comes to democratizing the research. Sometimes that I've had such mixed feelings about this. It's hard. It's definitely hard. And I don't know if that's one of the reasons why we've reached a slower period or not. It's a mixture of a whole bunch of different things, but I haven't seen a downside to that.
Can I ask you, I've been asking a bunch of UX leaders, and I was curious your take, where it's a tough climate in the industry as a whole. Judd Anton, a few months back, wrote a book about not a book, an article about the UX research reckoning and our owning our part as research practitioners in terms of where we are as an industry. Can you give me first a little bit about what your takeaways were from Judd's perspective and where you've landed in terms of thinking about our reckoning as a whole?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I agree
Mhm.
with him that we have not done enough to justify our existence sometimes and our value. I do agree with that part of it. Is it because we're doing too much of that middle range research that he mentions, like personas and journey maps? I don't know. I always prefer micro research, usability testing, things like that, because I can see that effect. I can see my effect on a product almost immediately. I love iterative design cycles and seeing how the research is actually helping shape the product. And that value is undeniable. So I agree with him that more micro research is needed and that it should not be looked down upon. I don't think we do enough of the macro research that he mentions, the research that actually guides business decisions. We do a horrible job of speaking the language of business and explaining our value and actually being more embedded in that end rather than in that middle range area. But because we've positioned ourselves as the voice of the customer or user, we've chosen a side essentially. And sometimes that's not the side of the business. As we know, oftentimes what the user wants or needs is in direct conflict with the business goals. So how can we prove to be valuable if we're on the opposite end of the business goals? So that's an issue. And I think that we can still advocate for the user, but also for the business as well, and let them know that we're not a hurdle or an obstacle, but we're actually a partner to help them.
Thank you, Kyle. We have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to mention, I have a few more questions for Kyle, but I mentioned it's more important that all of you have a chance to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please keep putting them in the chat window. I'll also pop in a survey for today's session so I'd love it. It takes 2 minutes. If you could please complete that survey. I mentioned that we're planning on running these weekly. So the more feedback we can get in terms of what's working and what to improve, I'd greatly appreciate it. So thank you. And Kyle, another question. I'm curious your perspective. So you're brought in by your clients. They've chosen you. You're brought in to run these strategic projects or usability testing. Have you seen any patterns in terms of, for our work, we always want our clients to run with what you provided in terms of research insights. And I've seen sometimes the clients are all in, they act on the insights you provide them with, and other times they don't. And I'm curious, have you seen any patterns there in terms of, can you see from an organization before and after a project, whether there's hope that the team will act on the insights versus not? Have you seen any patterns there? And do you have any recommendations for ensuring the organizations act on the insights you provide them with?
Yeah, it's super frustrating when they don't. And really, it's not that they're not doing what you've recommended, they're not doing anything. They just literally paid for something and they're doing nothing with it, not even doing something opposite, just sitting on the data. It happens so often. And when it doesn't happen, when people actually are taking those insights and doing something with them, I think it comes down to someone being responsible to take action on the data and recommendations. And a lot of times it's not someone as high up as you would imagine. When I'm hired by someone who actually sits on like a C-suite level, I actually find there's less movement because they are so distracted. They have so much on their plate. And I find that if they have someone they lean on, a decision maker that has the ear and the trust of the C-suite, and they have that responsibility to actually make something happen from this research, then it goes somewhere. Mm-hmm. The C-suite relies on them to actually inform them. And if higher approval is needed, they're there to give the approval. But things just move quicker that way. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they typically don't.
Okay, a very important question that I saved for the last 5 minutes, but a consultant going out on their own, looking to land their first client, what recommendations do you have to get the first?
Yeah, okay, so a website typically is not important. I will say that unless you're like starting out. You have to give people hey, this is where you go to find out more about me. Some people just use their LinkedIn pages very successfully. You could set it up with services and do that. Have something to say, I am out there, here's where you go to learn more, whether it's testimonials, whatever it is, case studies, that you have to have something. I find that my website, it just doesn't get much traffic at all. And if they contact us, I've thought about removing it so many times because I just get junk spammers. No matter how many different bots I put on there, they get through, and it's annoying to deal with. People typically, it's not going to be a cold lead. Someone's not going to come to my website and say, you're the person, and hire me. Usually it's just they're snooping around for pricing. They need to do their due diligence and get a third bidder, even though they already know they're not going to go with that third bidder. So it's there because it has to be. But when you're first starting out, I think that's when it's most important. So you want to set up shop, let people know that you're out there. I think we're lucky. When I first started, there was no LinkedIn. Twitter came 2008 later. it was really just word of mouth, just letting people know that you're there, making those contacts. I know some people who are really diligent about saying, okay, this week I am going to make contact with 10 people, and these are the 10 people I'm going to contact this week. I am not that person. I would probably be a lot more successful if I did that, though. If you are good at stuff like that, I would suggest doing that. I, for some reason, I'm just not. It's a part of the job that's hardest for me, to be honest. I just reaching out to people. I want to be helpful. And if I can't think of a way where I can be not that slimy, like, by the way, I'm out here and please hire me. If I can't come up with that message, then I'm not going to do it.
Yep.
But there are people who are really good at doing it and doing it well. And I suggest doing that. You've got to reach out to people. And it's not just putting a LinkedIn post out there to say, hey, I'm out there. You do have to do that, but you can't do it every week. You just have to make contact one-on-one.
Yep.
And I think that work will come. Keep an ear out on the Slacks, all the Slack groups you can set up things where anytime someone types the word consultant or freelance that you get notified, do that. Just keep your ear to the Slack boards. Something will come up.
Jackie mentioned she recently joined Chambers of Commerce because she started a nonprofit, and it's been valuable for projects as well and contacts. I did want to mention we have 2 more minutes, and I know, Kyle, to be respectful, I know you have to hop right at 2:00 Eastern, so we'll end right at 2. I mentioned I'd love this to be interactive. I wanted to ask one more question, but if anyone has a question they want to ask Kyle specifically, just raise your hand in the Zoom and we'll have time for one more question. Lisa was asking, any suggestions on approaching a company about mutual referrals? I've been referring customers to an SEO agency, but it hasn't been reciprocal. Is that something you've had experience with?
I really make friends with other consultants like myself or anyone else. We send work to each other. I don't believe in referral fees. Like I refer people, and usually it comes back around. We're all very good about that. I think this industry is very welcoming. Even though we're technically competition, there are times when you're busy and I'm slow, and we just help each other out. So I think it's good to let other freelancers and consultants know you're out there. Let them know that you're willing to give them work when you're busy. I find that like the SEO thing, like I know somebody who's in SEO that like they have recommended me because their clients like, why am I they're gonna pay you all this money to send all this traffic to their website and it's completely unusable. So they're like, hey, they refer me work. I'm very rarely in a situation where someone's coming to me asking for an SEO specialist. So I'm not able to repay the favor as much. I like it when I can actually repay the favor. And if I can't, that's hard. But you'll find that people are really willing they want good people to send their clients to. Like I've had to turn down client work from people like I've had a relationship with for 5 years, and I'm like, oh, I can't take the work. I'm too busy. I want to give them to someone I know can hit it out the ballpark. So it will be welcome to let people know that you're out there and that you want to do good work for their clients.
Kyle, thank you so much. This was
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much for participating. And thank you everyone for coming.